All right, good morning, Rakkasan. How we doing? All right, it feels like an innovation pep rally in here. All the energy that's building with the music, and it's standing room only back there, which is what I wanted to see. So first of all, welcome. Good morning. It's good to see all of our leaders here. For those on the panel, the target audience here is company commander, first sergeant above. Really the people closest to the problems. The ones where the rubber meets the road down at the company level, down at the tactical level, which is the type of innovation that we're trying to inspire. So it's great to have you here, and it's also great to have Colonel Eskandone from Strike Brigade. I believe some of your leaders are here as well. There's a lot going on in the division. We extended the invitation across the division, but for those who are either prepping to go to JRTC or out building readiness somewhere else right now, we are going to live stream this. We are live streaming right now on Facebook. So they can follow us live, or they can play us at a later time. So really excited about this. This is something we've been planning for a while. We're trying to grow an innovation insurgency inside of the Rakkasans and inside the 101st Airborne Division, and really trying to create some magic that will spread across the Army. Really drive innovation in the Department of Defense from the tactical level, which is something that people don't think. Typically, we think that we got to wait for the people with stars on their chest to come up with all the good ideas, because that's where the money resides, and really we just kind of deal with what we're given. But what we know is that there's a lot of good ideas. First of all, we know what the problems are, okay, because we're closest to them. Step one is identifying the problem, and step two is knowing what to do about it. And really that's what innovation is. And there's all kinds of definitions on innovation. For our panelists, they all work in the field of innovation, specifically defense innovation, and we may ask them their thoughts on what innovation means. A good place to start would be General McMaster, who says it's the conversion of new ideas into valued outcomes. which is really, that's what it's about for us. You know, in this brigade, we talk about innovation as one of the 4 priorities that we have, and trying to create a culture of innovation, which is for us defined as, you know, a culture of collaboration and critical thinking, where we come up with creative solutions to complex problems. So it's a lot of C's in that definition, but it's easy to remember that way. But that's what it is. It's thinking critically, looking at something and saying, why are we doing it that way? There's probably a better way to do it. And then the question is, once you've identified a problem and you're thinking critically and you know that there's a better way to do it, how do you go about doing it? And really, that's why I brought all these talented individuals up here to join us today, because they specialize in that. You know, in Silicon Valley, they talk about you build an ecosystem around a problem so that it can thrive. Okay, you got to have the right resource, you got to have the right talent, you got to have the right technology, you got to have the right money. And really, for me, in infantry speak, it's, well, if you got a problem, get a bunch of smart people in the same room together and let them work it out. And so I assembled a panel of the smartest people I could think of that work in this field and who have some real-world practical application in innovation in defense. And I've asked them to come and share some of their thoughts. So real quickly, I'd just like to introduce them. I'm going to give each an opportunity, about 5 minutes or so, to take the mic and let you know what they do, what they specialize in, and their thoughts on innovation. And then really what we want to do is open it up to the room, because there's a lot of people with good ideas. This is something that we've been doing in this brigade for a while. You can see some of the outputs of our innovation efforts around the side of the room. We're going to have an opportunity to go and visit the petting zoo when this is over, because if you have time, you can stick around for lunch and then discuss ongoing efforts and then some future efforts. I see Dr. Kevin Galloway back there over by our Brazier Breach, who just hosted a group of Rakkasans down in his makerspace down at Vanderbilt University yesterday, where they were talking about 3D printing applications for demolitions. So there's a lot going on right now, and we want to continue the momentum. And so with that, I'll go ahead and get started. And I'll start from my right, your left, with Colonel retired Peter Newell. Colonel Newell served 32 years in the United States Army as an infantryman, commanded everything from platoon to a brigade. His last job in the Army was as the director of the Rapid Equipping Force. That was post-brigade command. And he was really pioneered this defense innovation in getting things rapidly to the warfighter based off operational needs. And I'll let him talk more about his experiences there. But since he transitioned out of the Army, he started a company, co-founded BM&T Partners, which really, they go out and they identify emerging companies. First of all, they have helped connect the DoD with Silicon Valley, first and foremost. And now they're going out and looking for new companies, startups that have promising technology that will benefit the defense or IC space. And so he also was my neighbor in Palo Alto, which is pretty cool. So I had direct access to Pete. So he's probably upgraded to a bigger house, but he was my neighbor there, and we had our own little ecosystem of retired colonels and active there in our neighborhood right outside of Stanford. With him is Lauren McCune, who I met, was a recent Stanford graduate at the time, was working at BM&T, has continued to ascend through the ranks, and now is created an outpost in Washington, D.C. To be closer to the Pentagon, closer to the intel community. So there, she's specifically looking at SOF and intel community programs there. She's also a reservist in the United States Army, and not too long ago did a deployment to OIR with one of our special operations CT task force. So a great opportunity for a new lieutenant and some real world experience. Next to me right here is my buddy Rob Salome. If you participated in the Army Design Methodology workshop that we did last December, Rob was probably the most memorable speaker of the whole 2-week process, at least the one that the captains and the first sergeants and the staff officers remembered most, because Rob brought with him some real-world application of design thinking. So although he looks like a consultant now, Rob retired after 24 years in the Army. His last job was commanding the garrison here at Fort Campbell, but he had all kinds of other highfalutin jobs like aide to the vice president, aide to the Force Com commander, General Dan Allen, and he was a battalion commander in the 82nd. He's been in combat as is Pete, in many different places, and brings a ton of experience, and has taken what he knows about Army design methodology and leadership in general, and is now with Solutions 21 here in Clarksville, and it extends well beyond that, down in Nashville and some other states as well. I'll let him tell you more about that. The guy to my left, Jay Long, is somebody I just met through the Innovation Network. Honestly, I don't remember how we came across each other, but I think it was through 3rd Ranger Battalion, because he was out bouncing around in Silicon Valley with a group of leaders from 375 that were out there at the Defense Innovation Unit Experimental, meeting with heads of some of the big tech companies to talk, how do you grow innovation inside of a Ranger Battalion, and how do you do it inside of the Ranger Regiment, and then how do you kind of scale that across JSOC and some of the other SOCOM organizations. And so who do they put in charge of it? A captain right out of the career course. Why? Because he's the right guy. Jay Long defines disciplined disobedience, which you've heard the Chief of Staff talk about. I don't know if he would want me to say that in public, but I take it as a compliment, because he's an innovator, he's a disruptor, he knows what needs to be done, and he's willing to do what it takes and assume a little bit of risk to get it done. Quite honestly, he's someone that I think this audience could relate to based off of his age and experience, and I hope you guys link up with him. If you've seen the product that he has built for 375's Innovation Cell, it's impressive. And what he is helping them do is institutionalize innovation so that that momentum extends beyond any one commander's tenure in command. And that's my fear for all of us, is that we build all this energy, we come up with great ideas, but then things change out, we go on to a new mission, and then it dies. And so how do we institutionalize what we're doing here? That's one of the things I'd like to discuss in this panel. To Jay's left, Mr. Tim Griff, a good friend of mine that I met back in, I think was it 2016, Tim, that we did? 2015, man, where does the time go? We were in this great program that it was the pilot program of the Presidential Leadership Scholars Program, where you get to go with this group of really talented individuals, and you get to go to all the presidential libraries over the course of 6 months, learn about leadership at the executive level, but it's full of people from the military, startups, nonprofits. It's a really neat group of people. And Tim was there because he has, over the last 20 years or so, he has started 3 different nonprofits, I believe. He's currently the CEO and president, founder CEO of the National Security Technology Accelerator. And he was actually starting this when we were in the program together. I think it was you and maybe 2 other employees that were working for pretty much free. They were eating ramen noodles and working off his couch, and now he's all grown up now, and he took it to DC, went big time, and the company is doing so well contracting. So he takes these small startups and connects them to DoD problems using a type of contracting authority. It's called OTA, Other Transactional Authority, I believe, which is it's a fast track way to get things done, which has been a major hurdle in the acquisition bureaucracy for a long time, is the ability to get things done quickly. So Tim's figured that out, and he has recently relocated to Raleigh because things are running so smoothly in DC that he feels like he can put a little space between him and the company. So good on you, Tim. Glad to have you here, and he will be joining us for the Hamlin Farewell tonight. So I'm looking forward to that. And then down at the end, we've got Eddie Brown, Lieutenant Colonel. He's an active duty Army officer, military intelligence, working at the Defense Innovation Unit. No longer the Defense Innovation Unit Experimental. They dropped the X as of about 48 hours ago because they have been institutionalized, they have been validated, they've proven their worth, and this is something that's going to endure beyond Ash Carter and beyond Secretary Mattis, because they've proven that we needed that outpost in Silicon Valley, and not only just Silicon Valley, but also in Boston. I think you had one in Austin, maybe 2, in DC. So they're growing. It's a growth enterprise. So basically, I was able to interact with the DIUX back then. I had not met Eddie before, but just I've seen his portfolio and things that he's doing. So like I said, we've got a really talented group of people here. I appreciate all of y'all making the time to come here, and we're looking forward to hearing what you have to say. So I'll give you each got about 5-7 minutes, and we'll start with you, Pete. Turn it over to you.
I hope you don't mind, I gotta stand up. I'm old, and the knees and the back don't work as much as they used to. First, Well, Cockle, thanks for the opportunity to beat people over the head about innovation and other things, and thank all of you first for your willingness to keep serving your country, and more importantly for this magnificently great example of what I've been trying to tell the senior leadership of the Army probably for 7 years. And the point that I've been trying to make to folks since halfway through my tour of the Rapid Equipping Force was there is such incredible capacity sitting amongst the junior ranks of our force that we've not captured. They could solve probably 90% of the problems we have long before they ever get to the point that somebody else has got to do something. Part of the reason that I left the Army was I got addicted to the concept of problem solving and the idea that what you all have started to do here should be an intramural sport. What Cocktail's heard me say this a number of times is, we get intramural sports for basketball, football, but that is, quite frankly, you spend a lot of time shooting and increasing your marksmanship skills and your tactics and other things, but, how many of you deployed multiple times? How many of you would say that 70 to 90% of your time when you're deployed was spent solving problems on things that you weren't trained to do? Yeah, me too. And that's the point that we're trying to get across to folks is the ability to problem solve at the speed of an operation is that skill that we really don't have a plan to build, except we'll throw you out there and you're going to learn OJT. Some people are really good at it, and some people it takes a while to warm up, but we have no structure that ever, very deliberately decided we're going to find the young MacGyvers out there in the crowd and we're going to figure out how to put them together to attack things like this. The other challenge that I found, particularly as a director of REF, stumbling around Afghanistan, was that the pace at which technology shows up on the battlefield has become so fast that the tech will show up, we'll start to think about doing something about it, and the big machine will get involved in whatever. By the time we're able to articulate what the problem was that we were trying to solve, then find the tech to do something about it, get it back on the battlefield, the tech has changed and the application's changed so much so that the solution we deliver is irrelevant. Anybody agree? Happens a lot. Part of the problem is that we're not data mining folks like you at the forward edge of the battlefield and giving the tools and the things that you need to actually raise problems to a level that somebody can skim them off of. We're not giving you the tools that will allow you to apply the 60 to 70% solution on the spot and continue to move. I don't find it any different than tactics, a new weapon, or anything else. It's providing the ability to problem solve, whether that's code, a new piece of software to change the way an optic works or the way an ISR system works, or whether it's to 3D print a part for something or to change the way it adapts to a rifle. We shouldn't have to take you off the battlefield a year after something and talk to a bunch of PMs to make those kinds of changes to the things. And in my mind, that really belongs with you. The system's starting to change. And thankfully, I think that largely because of the voice of folks like me and your boss and the folks at this table, is folks are starting to listen and starting to try and figure out how they can have an impact. The new challenge, though, is I guess I'll put it this way. As a brigade commander in southern Iraq, I think I had 35 something odd companies under me. And my biggest challenge was getting a young company commander who owned an area to pitch me on something. And in generally my discussions as I walk around the battlefield were one or two things. Hey boss, here are the facts. And then dead silence. In which point I would have to come up with an answer, solution, something to apply it, or I would get, hey boss, this is what we ought to do, and I'd get no facts. In particular, any intel guys out there? Man, I got a lot of that for you guys. What I really wanted, and I didn't realize until later, is I wanted somebody to pitch me. I wanted somebody to understand the problem, do enough of their own discovery work on it, validate that they had the right flipping problem, go through a number of iterations of MVPs of that, and figure out what they really ought to do. And it wasn't until I spent a boatload of time at Stanford and Silicon Valley that I figured out that, that skill set that people are building startups on, you guys have blown out of the water, guys and ladies. You absolutely can do this. And if we would just give you the skills and teach you to do that, all these things out here that you're working on, there'd be thousands of them. But they'd be validated and ready to go. And the reason I say that is, one of the things that the company I built specializes is vetting and validating problems before they get into the system. Some are small, and some are massively complex 20-year issues. And what we're finding is that despite the fact that we think we're experts on problems, out of Lauren, you're going to correct me if I'm wrong, 350 some odd problems that have come across that platform in 3 years, only 2 have survived in their original form. What we find is that we're really good at finding symptoms of things, but we're not really good about finding the actual problem we're trying to solve. I learned in Afghanistan that it wasn't until I actually handed somebody something that I ever had an honest conversation about what the real problem was. Well, and that's okay. It's not that people are dumb, and it's not that they're disinterested. It is the way things work. So the idea of I can create a minimum viable a prototype or something as fast and cheaply as I possibly can allows me to generate a really honest conversation about something and real quickly find out that despite the fact that we're using the same words, we get different meanings about something, a different understanding, different perspective. It's not until we go through that process that we start to get to the point where we're all on the same sheet of music about something. A couple of pivots later, it's like, that's not really the problem, it's really this. And now we're able to look at people with resources and say, quit spraying your resources all over the place and fix that. Enough data, there's enough fact that people can actually work with and do something. So from my perspective, looking at innovation from the tactical level, which is what I would call the application of ingenious responses to not having the right stuff, which is what you guys do, to how do you do this as a systematic response across the military, and quite frankly across the country, is starting to grow, but it's kind of a plot. I pushed hard on Colonel Coggle and other people to write about things. And I'm going to say it again here. You guys are doing great stuff. What you suck at is writing about and sharing the things you're typing doing, because I want to find a brigade at Fort Bragg and one at Fort Hood, one at Fort Seattle and other places that start reading this stuff and say, you know what, we can do that. And we can actually do it better. And eventually I'm going to find an intramural competition amongst brigades across the Army who are competing with each other to find the nastiest, gnarliest problems and solve them faster than anybody else in the world. And in the meantime, they're going to learn how to print things and program things and fly things, and eventually they're going to prove to the military establishment that they're vastly more capable of taking on technology than the people are who are trying to deliver it to you. So my opening comments is just first to thank you for doing this, and Colonel Coggle, thanks for being the bright, shining star champion. Now just do it more. Do it more, and please share the wealth with other folks. We're going to go from the old guy to the youngest at the table. And I'll set Lauren up. Lauren is, and I'll call it the typical millennial, but a classic example of somebody who's got, fantastic problem-solving skills. She spent time downrange on a targeting team with SOCOM. It largely runs part of our intel portfolio, but she's been really masterful about understanding those tactical level intel problems and kind of pulling them out and putting them together with the reality of the ground, rather than what the non-air breathers like me think about things. So it's kind of a testament to what it really takes to make this work. It's not a bunch of old folks sitting at the front of the room, but it really is a very diverse group of men, women, young, old, lots of backgrounds that you have to put together to make this work. Because if it all looks alike, it is a favor statement waiting to happen. So there you go.
Thanks, Pete, and thanks to Colonel Cogwell for inviting me to the panel. As Pete mentioned, I am an Army reservist, an intel officer. I saw two intel bodies in the back there. There's not many of you here, but we do work on some pretty intractable problems in the intel community, and we often confine ourselves by arbitrary classification barriers and hunkering down in our little skiffs and not wanting to go outside and talk to people. And that's really the mission that I've tried to take on in executing Pete's vision at BMNT, is getting on the ground and talking to people about their problems. And as I've worked with all of these different agencies, in and out of the Pentagon, in and out of all of the other intel agencies in DC, I've found that what struck me the most is that a lot of people are working on the same thing, which sounds pretty basic, but it's something that I think we don't do a very good job of recognizing within the US government and within the military. I was just speaking with someone yesterday from the Air Force Special Operations Command, and they were working on a problem of precision delivery of small payloads. So we're talking delivering ammo, blood, medicine, food, whatever, to an outpost or to an observation post within 10 meters, let's say, this precision delivery. And that struck me that that's something that everybody could use. It's not just an Air Force thing, but of course, you know, they're not really talking to anyone else, they're just talking to me. And the lesson that I would like to extend to everyone here is that you're not alone in whatever problem you're facing. Talk to other people. There's somebody else out there that's working on something very similar. And not only are they working on something very similar and having the same struggles that you are and trying to execute it and make something happen, but they're also willing to help. Not just in the military, but also across the country. I spent about 6 years working in Silicon Valley, and you would be surprised at how many people are just really excited to give back to the country that made them successful. And all that is required, which is a little bit of a lift up front, but is starting that conversation and saying, this is my problem, can you help me solve it? And 9 times out of 10, the answer is yes, I can, and I'm willing and excited to help. What this requires from us as both leaders and subordinates is enabling the ability to ask that question, to articulate the problem, and to ask for help. And that can be hard, especially when we all have our day jobs that require a lot of time, and we can't spend hours running around trying to figure out who can help us solve the problem. So as leaders, we can enable a culture of innovation from our subordinates, let them know that there are paths to, if they have a good idea, they can try to implement that within their organization. And once it gets to a high enough level, you know, you start asking for money and all those other things. That's the easy part. Once you figure that out, everybody on this panel can help enable that solution once it gets to that point. The tricky part as subordinates is we can't just offer up a good idea and expect that it is going to be solved. We have to do a little bit of work on the back end, and that requires talking to people that we think have the same problem as us and asking them their opinions, gathering data, developing a prototype, and proving that this solution might actually work. And so that's what I would encourage everyone to do, is do all that early, so when you go to your leaders and they have done such a good job of enabling this culture of innovation, you get to the easy part. And you can just ask the simple question of who else is working on this and how can they help. So thank you again to Colonel Cogwell for the opportunity to speak, and I hope to hear about some of the problems that you all are experiencing and maybe how we can help.
Thanks, Lauren. Thanks to Colonel Cogwell and to all of you. I appreciate the opportunity to really be on this panel. It's really cool to hear all the great things that you're doing. Before I get too deep into my thoughts, I wanted to introduce Blake Hogan. If you can just stand up for 1 second. Blake is from Bunker Labs. Thanks, Blake. For any of you who have entrepreneurs or people who have innovative ideas and they don't know what to do with that idea, to turn it into a business, Bunker Labs exists just to do that for veterans. And they're not just in Nashville. Blake runs their business in Nashville, but they're across the country. And so if you think that there's not a network of people, as Lauren said, out there who want to help you, that's not true. There's absolutely a ton of people who want to help you, but trying to get that help in the last 4 months before you separate from the military is the wrong answer. You got to get started now. And it's organizations like Bunker Labs who can make it easy for you because they have the network to make that possible. And we try and participate that in Solutions 21 here in this region. Our company is nationwide. We have offices in Pittsburgh, Kansas City, Phoenix, and now here in Nashville. And I've built our office here in Nashville. I retired last year, and I've served with many of you that are in the room. It's kind of cool to see everybody again. And I'd say that one thing that's consistent about what I've been hearing today and talking with folks is that there's no one really here that expects you to be innovative. What they expect you to do is be innovative about establishing a culture of innovation in your organization. It's really about building and leading the right culture. And one of the things that I found that is much easier now than it was in earlier parts of my career is that there's so many innovative people at the lowest level of the organization who have an incredibly deep understanding of the problem that they're facing, but they don't know who to tell. And so who do you tell, and how do you create a culture that people aren't afraid to talk? When I was lieutenant and captain, I remember specifically having a platoon sergeant tell me that he told the privates not to talk to me because I was the company commander. And hopefully that's not still the atmosphere in infantry units anymore. But that's the wrong answer, because that's who has that nugget of information that you need in order to solve a problem. And so in order to create that culture, how are you presenting that idea of getting over yourself? And one of the things that I find is I work with all different kinds of companies across the country, whether it's anybody knows Swisher Cigar Company? Swisher Cigars, enjoy them maybe? That's one of our clients. I work with a large insurance company out of Kansas City. We work with construction firms out of Pennsylvania. And all of them have the same problem about they want to stifle good ideas and not let them bubble to the surface because they can't get over themselves. They think that they're subject matter experts in their field, and they think that they've got it all figured out. And I spend a lot of my time doing coaching with them, helping them get over themselves and letting them realize you're not as cool as you think you are, and you actually have some great answers inside the depths of your organization. And so how are you empowering the people deep inside your organization to teach them through cultural change how to solve problems? And it's about thinking about problem solving. And you know, Colonel Cogwell mentioned my thoughts on design methodology. I could probably talk a whole day just on that idea, because I think that the way that the Army grabbed a hold of that piece of doctrine and has developed it is sadly lacking in what its capability is for the Army. And that you all have an incredible, that's how you change culture. And that's how you can change culture. It's changing the way you think about problem solving. And that's what I would encourage you to do is look at how are you creating feedback loops in your organization so that fire team that gets the piece of intel that they feed into the company level intel cell that goes to the battalion, that gets the asset, that delivers the munition, that kills the insurgent. How do they know that they were the ones who got the intel? And you applaud that victory and champion that kind of behavior inside your organization so that everyone's bringing that nugget every single hour of every single day on the battlefield. That's really important. And then also, so many organizations outside the Army and inside the Army don't create clarity around risk-taking. How do you create an environment where it's comfortable to take risk in the right way and in a healthy way? There are kinds of risks that platoons take, and kinds of risks that companies take, and kinds of risks that battalions take, etc., all the way up. And how do you create clarity on risk-taking so that everybody knows that they can take risk and it's okay? And that I want you to take risks, just know that I'm going to hold this kind of risk back. So that's about holding those reins, right? And if you want people to extend those reins out and pull on them, they got to know what you think about how hard to pull. And then the final thing I would say is, how are you creating a culture of listening to the people inside your organization so that people know that when they say something, you're not going to make them feel like they're unappreciated. If you can figure out some of those things, I think that you're definitely on to something, and you can change the way you think about problem solving. So, thanks.
Can everybody hear me? Yeah, right. That was a little bit of high pressure moment. First off, thanks everyone for being here. Sir, thanks for inviting me down. My goal on this board is to kind of just relay to you guys my experience at the company level. I think it's easy to see the ivory tower and expect ARPA to solve our problems. Spoiler alert, they're not going to. And so what I can share is my experiences coming up to the 101st. I just actually left in December. What my adventures looked like, lessons learned, and then some of the organizations that, when leveraged effectively, can empower what you're doing. So first off, Sergeant Major Harvard, good to see you. I was in a no slack when I came up, and my journey to innovation was started with pain. I remember reading as like a second lieutenant the 4-hour work week and feeling frustrated that like the civilians out there could be on the beach in Tahiti, and like because we actually had a mission and cared about something, it felt like we are now Sisyphus pushing a boulder up a hill. So like our ceiling tiles are falling down and everyone's stressed out. And I asked, is there a way that we can take that approach of being efficient and enjoying life, but still fulfilling a mission? And so that led to my question of like, well, what if we change it from a 4-hour work week to like a 4 problems a week thing? What if I can save bandwidth and eliminate friction by developing systems to make my life and the lives of my soldiers easier? And then instead of constantly reacting to contact and every morning meeting being this, reacting to your ambush sort of drill, we can actually get enough lead time that my guys have the slack to actually make stuff happen. And so that began my journey, motivated by anger and caffeine. And it has been my underlying why, which is how do we preserve bandwidth and prevent our guys from getting burnt out so we can actually focus on the fights worth fighting and not the accidental PowerPoint nightmares that we seem to get sucked into that prevent leaders from being in front of their guys and their guys from feeling empowered. And so the first thing I learned was actually embrace the hate. So when you're frustrated by a process, the challenge that we have as a culture is like we generally just double down and work harder and grind through it. Like the whole reason you have a Ranger tab in the first place is to prove that you can endure ridiculous amounts of pain and suffering, maybe not think about it a whole lot, but you can endure it. And that's a double-edged sword, because what that leads us to do is put up with systems that don't work, and to just triple our efforts at using DTMS or DCS as Army or name the legacy system that's not actually helpful, instead of asking, why does this not work? And so the first thing I'd tell you guys, like right now today, if something's stupid, listen to yourself, because you're probably right. And the second question is figure out why it's stupid, and then actually craft that into a problem that you can solve. Because just inherently playing the martyr and whipping yourself and saying this is the worst thing ever and I hate my life helps no one, including your wife and kids and family and soldiers and like the whole radiating fractal tree around you. So listen to the pain. Do not try to push your way through it. That's our first instinct in everything, and it's always the wrong one. Like take a step back and think. If you're a boxer, like the first step is not sprinting in. It's like having tactical patience and playing ring general. So I offer that's the first lesson I learned in this. The second one, I don't know how many of you guys have seen Zero Dark 30, but there's that scene in there where they've got the closed room, and they're like, there is no one else. Like, this is it. There's not some other office on the floor. And for that one, what I'd offer is the problems we deal with at the tactical level, like DARPA's not looking at. Like the problem with a lot of big institutional modernization and technology efforts is that they're kind of like Janus, the two-headed god in mythology. They can see the last war really well, and we've got historians for days. And like now they're looking at like crazy future megacity stuff, and that's fantastic. But like the right now today fight, DTMS, having like a cloud-based system for HR, not having to put in LES forms and 6 other documents for relief, like the right now today stuff is not on the radar. And so what I offer is like, you are the last hope, right? You need to be the one that owns the problem statement, but do so in a way where you're not a martyr. Like just saying the Army's terrible at stuff and assuming that we can't do anything really doesn't empower anybody's efforts, right? So objectively look at the problem, don't make it worse than it is, and then figure out how your Venn diagram of pain overlaps with somebody else's. Because we're not alone in any of this stuff. I just talked earlier on like the precision guidance stuff. The problems for the Air Force are the problems for the Marines or the problems for the Navy. And different organizations have different streams of funding that let us get after stuff faster. So if something is obnoxious and it's a legitimate problem and you bounce it off of like your wife and your best friend and they agree this isn't being stupid, before you start sprinting after the good idea fairy, take a step back and start reaching out within the network to find who else could be having that problem too. And I offer that one of the challenges that we get to experience directly, and one of the things I've been focusing my efforts on, is bridging the gap between the foxhole and the ivory tower. And so, as has been mentioned multiple times, like money exists, funding exists, but what doesn't exist, and what we're trying to prove, is a methodology that lets us go from individual problem to solution. And I don't know how many of you guys have seen Simon Sinek's talk about start with why, but where we've looked at it is, okay, why is pretty common sense. Like, our job is to get better at killing bad guys and bringing more good guys home. Like universally distills down to those practices. The challenge for a lot of innovation efforts is then it goes to what, and we're looking at individual technologies and capabilities, and then all these crazy gee-whiz terms like quantum computing and AI and deep learning get thrown in, and a lot of us club swinging Neanderthals kind of get lost back there. And the underlying problem with focusing innovation on the what element is it moves too fast. Like, I would reach out a lot with Pete and his team to be in Silicon Valley because startups are developing tech. But the issue is the what changes so fast that by the time I understand it and can formulate a problem statement around it and then work on getting a problem like push through the process and get a program of record established, that was old news 5 years ago. So instead what we're working on is how do you amend the how? Like, what does the process and sequence of bridges look like that let me take a problem and crowdsource it and ideate it and leverage other resources, and then consistently develop a product that I can refine over time that is no longer just a Rakkasan's issue or a Vestone issue or an Army issue, but a joint issue. And then as you look laterally, like our coalition partners have the same problem. And anyone who's deployed has realized that we're all sharing the same defects, we're all in the same compounds. It's like making this a team sport is in our best interest. And so I'd offer that another thing that's really changed the game for us is looking at life as a series of Venn diagrams and then approaching innovation like targeting. So for everyone who's ever run a mission out here, ever done Intel stuff, the F3EAD model works just as well for conferences as it does for taking down objectives. Like, figure out where people are going to be who are related to your problem. Do a little bit of homework in IPB, LinkedIn, and Googling. When you get in there, relentlessly introduce yourself to people, stack business cards, rock your LinkedIn profile, figure out who knows who, figure out how that ties to your enduring problem statements, and then aggressively exploit that for the next cycle. And that's what we've done consistently because everybody knows everybody else, and as long as you have a meaningful why that is not a martyrdom complex but a legitimate problem, people are usually willing to get on board. And so that's kind of like the archetypal how, and I can absolutely unpack that more, and I don't pretend to have the answers, but I have a lot of the mistakes and subsequent lessons learned. And what I offer for you guys at the leadership level, the combi level, and the platoon leaders. One, for all the first lieutenants in the room, I know a lot of my peers left the Army at around that time because they felt like there wasn't an opportunity to innovate or to use their minds or to be creative. And so we had this brain drain thing going on where people are like 5 and flying out of here. And I think the problem is there's not enough conversation about what we can do here within this organization to actually make change because it's not common. But I can promise you, if like my N=1 case study, it's completely feasible, and there are absolute leaders willing to support. And for all the company commanders and first sergeants out there, you guys can foster that. But it requires taking the redneck engineering that's used to make the greatest poncho hooches of all time in the field, and everyone who's got like a car that they jerry-rigged in the parking lot that they show off on the weekends, and applying that to our problems. And then taking that natural talent and connecting them with the training, from 3D printing and additive manufacturing to CAD design to lean startup methodologies. Like this stuff's all free, it's all there, it's all within the DoD ecosystem, we're just not connected. And leaders, I think, too often mistake what they're told is important with what's going to be important tomorrow, and so it's required to do this at scale. And so one, for your leaders, identify who's already moving fast, breaking things and playing around and empower them. Yes, they probably need to be dialed in a little bit. If they're getting closer, like they're walking the artillery onto the target, fantastic, continue mission and support as you can. But fundamentally, iteration isn't an excuse for randomness, but as a leader, at the same time, you can't expect innovation to be, I have a problem, it goes in, I have a nice linear solution on the other side. As Pete talked on, like you have a massive funnel of good ideas, and the good idea fairy is going to whisper really loudly in the beginning, and then physics and reality and laws are going to get in the way with like the actual technological process throughout. And then the other side, 350 may turn into 5. But if those 5 work, the amount of time that saves, the amount of lethality that gives, the amount of guys that can bring home, makes it worth all the effort. And so what I'd say is this methodology and approach, we started applying to everything from people, procedures, and technology. So we're working on barricaded shooter complexes. And how do you mitigate against the threat of a barricaded shooter downrange? Using quadcopters that are hooked with detonators, and that's become a joint process. So Navy and Marine DoD is helping us out. We've been working with DARPA and other agencies. Like, people are willing to play ball with you, provided you come with a compelling problem, and provided you're willing to actually put in sweat equity and take ownership. One of the things that's fascinated me the most is the biggest limiting factor for academia and for a lot of these companies is the problems. They don't know what problems they're actually facing. They don't know, get advice from people who were in the green machine 20 years ago. Every day removed from the fight gives you less and less awareness of what's actually going on. We live in the inverse world. We have more problems than we could ever deal with, and usually we just work 3 times harder and crush a couple monsters and continue mission. And by bridging the gap between pain points and problems, and turning AAR into an opportunity to develop problem statements that you can then identify the most appropriate use of, then you can change the way the institution solves problems, and you can empower your people to move fast, break things, and get after commander's intent. That applies to all kinds of opportunities, military specific, and like our work within trauma medicine has been playing in the dual use space. So how do I identify a problem that is shared by both EMTs or civilian trauma medical centers and the military, and then leverage those opportunities to create joint funding, so that way venture capitalists and companies that are moving really fast and breaking things, who want to develop that next tech, will do it for you, and your job is to break it and tell them how to build it better. It's a fantastic setup. And often, us as a resource to help test is like fantastic for them. And so the last thing I'll leave you guys with is the power of asking a better question can't be understated. And I think there's a lot of beauty in learning how to take pain and turn them into problem statements and coming back to see what the real issue is, and building a compelling narrative to get other people on board with that problem, and having the ability to take ownership in a way that lets leaders get behind you and is not threatening. And one of the challenges in all this is making sure that it never becomes about you, it remains about the issue, so that as leaders rotate out, that they're not worried about their legacy. That's amazing what you can do, and nobody cares who gets the credit. And I hope that helps provide a little bit of context for what I'm doing here, and if anyone's got any questions, then I'll be available afterwards.
I'm a stander as well, but I'll stay in the view. I think I'm in the view. Yeah. Thumbs up. First off, thanks, Colonel John, for having me here, and thanks to all of you for taking the time to come out. My own background, never served in the military, and actually never worked inside the army. And the reason I'm telling you these things is going to color some of the comments that I make. As John said, I'm sort of a social entrepreneur. NSTXL is the 3rd nonprofit startup that I've done. It's nonprofit startups are all the risk of for-profit startups with none of the equity upside, which is something my wife doesn't find funny either, but we deal with it. When I got, what pulled me into this is everything I've done in my life has been working with innovative technology companies, particularly startups, a lot of Silicon Valley based, in market areas where bureaucracy has an impact on market outcomes. So my own technical background is in energy, which is one of the most heavily regulated sectors of the economy, and in a place where actually some of the best ideas and some of the best companies that were coming out and VCs who were investing in it took an absolute bath because of poor policy and bureaucracy. It didn't really matter how good your energy technology was at the local Public Utility Commission. It didn't allow you to plug into the grid. Or FERC wasn't creating good net metering policies to allow for diversification of the grid. And so everything that I've done in my background looks at how do we help innovation thrive in a rules-constrained environment. Because when you're in the military, when you're dealing with DoD, when you're dealing with contracting policy, you're never actually dealing in a free market. And so to have that kind of free market efficiency, to have that private sector efficiency, it's a much taller task for the people in this room than it is if you're outside and you're just dealing and playing in market forces. So there's a lot of lessons that can be taken from the private sector, but you always have to color it and just apply those lessons to yourselves. And one of the things I love about everyone in this room, just by showing up here, and you'll see this comment on everyone that's speaking here, we're all students of innovation, and we're all constantly learning, and no one ever really gets it figured out. But it's just about taking those lessons and applying them to what you can do. So I wanted to take a few moments to just calibrate innovation as a term, because there's a lot of things that I think are a little bit misrepresented and sometimes misapplied. to innovation in a policy-constrained environment. So, as John said, one of the things when I first got into this, NSTXL, when I started it, was nothing more than a tech scouting nonprofit. After I left my last nonprofit, I was just kind of trying to figure out what was next, and I left DC, moved back to my home state of Texas, and was in Austin. And I was approached by a couple of recently retired combat veterans who said that energy was what they saw as the biggest vulnerability on the front lines, and the lack of ability to get better energy technologies, sort of get off some of the really intensive generation capabilities that cause really big supply chain constraints, that would be helpful. Well, being an energy guy, knowing where all those innovations were, I was like, well, that's easy. That's what I can do to help solve this problem. I know where these technologies are, so started a new nonprofit and just started going to DoD offices, program offices with energy problems. We had no problem finding the solutions. But within about 60 days, I realized that if you can't get this on contract, what good is it? And then when I started looking at contracting options and found out it took 18 to 24 months to get a contract executed, kind of blew my mind. So as we were iterating, we looked at, and had, I guess I can trace it back to one fateful conversation with a retired Army colonel over a couple of rye Manhattans at the Four Seasons in Georgetown, where he told me about Other Transaction Authority, which is a rapid contracting vehicle that was first created by Congress from NASA after the launch of Sputnik, and it was actually, if you know DARPA, which I'm assuming you do, was the first contracting authority that DARPA was based on. And so it's been around forever, allows you to sort of pull innovative technologies, specifically for prototyping, so you can test something and get on a contract quickly. And so, we iterated, looked into it, found one on FedBizOps and just applied for it and ended up winning it. And then we kind of got into the contracting business as a necessity of helping to innovate. So, we changed our model to take what are the rules of the game and just adjust them a bit differently to innovate in the current environment. I was a lobbyist for 7 years in DC on advanced energy policy. We have no energy policy in this country. Basically, the tax code is how we dictate what we use energy on. And I realized pretty quickly that if you're going to rely on a policy change to fix the problem, then you might as well just go ahead and exhale, because it's not going to happen anytime soon. But what I love about what's going on here, what folks in this room are working on, is you're figuring out how to operate in the constrained environment in which you're in, and that is the core of innovation. So one of the things I want to point out is, something that is unique, I think, to a lot of the problems you're dealing with it's the complexity, and you touched on this. Complexity is something that even in the world of supercomputing, it's something that when you look at how complexity can stack up, it's almost a little bit staggering. So is anyone here familiar with the traveling salesman problem? A couple people. So traveling salesman problem is kind of what all algorithm theory is based on, and a lot of algorithms, the earliest algorithms that were created for computers is based on. Very simple problem. You have a salesman, they have a certain number of stops. What is the most efficient way to maximize how many stops, how many sales calls they can make, and minimize the amount of time? Very simple problem. So let's say that this, if you look at the math behind it, let's say that in this particular problem, salesman's got 5 cities to stop in, right? There are 60 possible combinations that salesman can travel to make those 60 stops, to make those 5 stops. If you double the number of stops, the possible number of combinations increases from 60 to 1.8 million. With just 5 new additional stops. And so you see how complexity can ramp up. And so the world that you live in, and the world oftentimes, even in a market economy, that innovation has to exist in is what we call a heuristic. It's when oftentimes the suboptimal solution is actually the best one. And that's probably the biggest lesson that you deal with on a daily basis is you don't have the resources and you don't have the time, and oftentimes you don't have the information to get to the optimal. So you have to learn to deal in the suboptimal and learn that that's okay. Second point is, hear a lot about failure and a fear of failure and what is perceived as failure. One of my most recent hires is a retired colonel, And gave him an assignment that was kind of outside anything he'd done before. Because when you come into a nonprofit, we're always going to be resource constrained. We're always smaller than we probably need to be, and everyone has to be able to do a little bit of everything. And so I gave him this assignment and expected him to come back with questions. And I was actually kind of surprised when he didn't. And then when he delivered the product, it was not anything close to what we needed. And so I sat him down and I sort of said, look, I told you that I knew this wasn't really in your wheelhouse. Why didn't you ask me any questions about how to do it? Because this is actually kind of far from what we need. And he told me, he's like, well, typically if you ask questions, it can be perceived as failure. And I laughed at it because I quit back. I was like, well, what also is perceived as failure is actual failure. So you gotta, you need to encourage that. And I've realized that that's not, it's a cultural thing. And so, comments have been made earlier, but it's really important to support each other. But the advantage that the military has that you don't see often in the startup world is when you talk about design thinking and design thinking exercises, and it's something that BM&T does better than anyone else in this industry. Empathy is the core component of design thinking. You have to understand what the end user is going through. And most of the time with startups, you see people starting companies that actually aren't always the end user, particularly in big corporations. You see this all the time. They have no idea what the end user is actually thinking, doing, perceiving. In this case, and in most cases, you're both the end user and you're the innovator. And that's an extremely powerful card to play that you have on your side, is that you know what you need and you know what a possible solution is. And so that's something to keep in mind, that it's an advantage that you have that quite frankly, I don't see very often outside of the military and in the private sector. And then the last point I'll make is, and I learned this pretty quickly, and this ties empathy to the next step, which is, alignment of incentives is a key component of moving anything forward. And when we got our first contracting authority, it took us 2.5 years to run our first contract. And I decided that we were going to kind of innovate how this was done. So we told the government, we don't want any money up front, because we know we can find tech. We're still to this day batting 1,000. We've never failed to find a technology to fit a problem. What I didn't realize going in was that I could do everything right. We could find the tech, we could get it to them, and then for something completely out of our control, contract fell through, and we end up seeing nothing. We don't get paid if we don't get something on contract, because we wanted to align our incentives with success, which was finding the solution and getting it prototyped. So, instead of it, and at first I blamed the contracting officer and the agreements officer, and I'll still blame him today. But what I didn't realize was I wasn't being empathetic to what his chain of command was. And I've noticed that in the contracting process in particular, there's no alignment of incentives, and that's oftentimes the problem, is that there's different kind of rules and regulations, there's a different chain of command for each step in the process, and they don't align. So when I started listening to him, and when I started having empathy to what he needed to do to check his boxes to get approval on the contract, we went from 0 contracts to 9 contracts the next fiscal year. And it's all a process of learning to do that, and we had to change our model a bit to align our incentives with a key node in the process, which was just getting legal approval for a contract. It wasn't just about finding the right technology. It was about making sure that it was correctly communicated to every chain of command and every part of the step in the format and in the language that they needed to hear it. So being able to align your own incentives internally and providing that support structure for each other is really key. And then the last point I'll make is, you hear a lot in the innovation world about being disruptive. Got to be disruptive, etc. Disruption is an outcome, it's not a goal. And more often than not, the companies that I see in the private sector and startups that say that they're setting out to disrupt something, they don't actually succeed, because they're so focused on that transformative change that along the way, they start to ignore the very simple fixes. And so as you innovate, just make sure that you focus on being in the solution business, not in the disruption business. If you create the right solution, it will by nature be disruptive, and there will be uptake if you can build that culture around it to accept those ideas. So just keep that in mind as you're moving forward, that I actually think, and maybe it's because I'm always self-selected into rooms of people who want to innovate, but I've actually been very impressed with the number of folks across the services that are interested in innovation and are embracing it. And I think oftentimes you guys are a little hard on yourselves about it. I see a lot of great ideas. I see a lot of acceptance of the culture. But just, it's a journey and it's a process, and you keep doing it. So showing up here today is a big part of that. I'm really appreciative to be a part of this and looking forward to the conversation.
Awesome. Hey, sir, thanks again. I'm humbled to be part of such an esteemed panel. As a matter of fact, I've been listening carefully, and I feel like I got lucky here, because I'm going to try to take some of the ideas that we've heard today, and I'm going to do my best to boil it down into 4 simple rules that I think might help guys at the O3 and E8 level and below start to accomplish a bit of a cultural change. If it's not helpful, hey, at least it's just 4 bullet points you can line through in your green book. So I'm gonna wind back the clock to Lieutenant Brown, 1st Platoon, Charlie Company, 3505 PIR at the 82nd Airborne Division. My guys were awesome. Stanley McChrystal even told us so on a drop zone one night. We could jump, we could ruck, we could do battle drills until our eyes bled. It was reflexive, it was rote, and frankly, I just really enjoyed the experience. So that's what we were recognized for. The thing that I enjoyed the most, though, is when we got handed the OPFOR duties, because that's when my guys really showed what they were capable of. That's when, I'm trying to think what we got the most in trouble for. Probably stealing the vehicles of the Blue Fork. So we would go out, we found quickly through minimum viable product that we had to keep the driver with the vehicle so that we didn't have loss of accountability of equipment. So that meant we started to steal the vehicles and their drivers, and we suddenly were mobile and we could do a lot more. Matter of fact, the controllers had actually reset an exercise once because we rolled up on a brigade meeting and took them all out. So that was fun. Another thing was we were out on a particular exercise in which my platoon minus, I had about 20 dudes, were supposed to take on Alpha Company, the entirety of Alpha Company. We were supposed to road march the objective, but no one actually put that in the order. It was definitely implied we were supposed to road march, but when we came upon some buses that appeared to have no tasking for the night, and I asked the driver if he had about 30 minutes, he did, and we got to the objective site a lot earlier so we could place some really good obstacles. And we crushed Alpha Company the next morning after having a good night of sleep, so tell me that isn't a win, right? Anyway, I'm going to step back from that, and I'm going to talk about this OPFOR mindset that I think you guys can relate to try to implement a lot of the things that we've heard here today. And it's all part of this culture of innovation. So I'm going to have just 4 quick points. I've done my best to put them in as plain a language as possible. And I even, Jay, you told me you were going to be the one to break the seal on the first 4-letter word, and did. So I've gone through and I've changed it to darn. So, all right, sir, we're going to keep it clean. Okay, awesome. So these happen to be building, right? So if you don't do number 1, you can't do number 4, number 2, etc. So number 1, show up. That sounds crazy, but right time, right place, right uniform matters. I'll tell you, don't let your training calendar drive. You need to drive your training calendars. What matters? What are you going to spend time on? When are you going to let your guys play with the minimum viable products, get your shape charters dialed in, to implement your drones appropriately, to get your radio systems up to snuff? That doesn't happen if guys are completely, well, to Jay's point, just enduring, right? You got to give them time to think and play with things. And as a leader, I'll tell you, it's even more challenging because not only do you have to do the training plan and you have to be at the right time, right place, right uniform, you also have to figure out where the decisive point of the battlefield is. This is just like tactics. You have to move to the sound of the guns, wherever that decisive point in innovation, you need to be there. And I challenge you to try to make sure you're there. So that's point 1. Point 2, this one's tough. It goes against what we've been trained to do, especially at Ranger School. Don't be a jerk. It's very simple. Diversity matters, and these are usually pickup teams. So don't drive people away, or worse, make them one of your biggest fans to fail spectacularly. There's a lot of that can go around if you let it, right? So be able to lead peers and sometimes lead up the chain. Be a person that knows how to speak appropriately to power. Part of empathy is appropriate communication. We have to be able to talk to people on their terms, and that's hard. But you really can boil it all down to the simple thing, this is what I would do, just don't be a jerk. And build those quality networks that Jay talked about. Now, the operative word in there is quality networks. Everyone has to manage their own return on investment, and it's not quantity networks that you're looking for, you want quality. So that's number 2. Number 3, this is where I had to edit a little bit. I'm going to say, you have to give a darn. There's an S word in there someplace. What you'll find is that you're mortal, right? And as a mortal, you're going to have a point where at some point you're going to say, hey Doc, my give a darn's broke. Can you help me out with that? And no one but you can actually do that. So some people talk about resharpening their axe, taking a break, spending time with family. All those things are important because what I'll tell you is psychologists that specialize in optimal performance call this monitoring self-talk. And you have to know when, hey, you know what, today is not the day to make this decision. Now is not the time to have this conversation. And have the self-discipline to have that conversation at a time and place of your choosing, much like any other operation. But don't ever let, for all of us who live in the fishbowl, never let your Joes see you not give a darn, because it'll kill everything. So know when to step back and charge your batteries. So, number 4, we're all guilty of this. Former infantryman, I've heard these things. It's important to know all you can. Know everything about everything. If it's in front of you, it's in front of you, and you don't get to just pass that off. What I mean is, don't be that one that says, this is not my job. Fix this can of spilled you know what, and let me know when it's done. And I'll come back and I'll do the cool stuff when I'm ready to. That is not acceptable. That's a killer. It's an absolute killer for morale. It's a killer for your team. Everyone's doing the very best they can, and you should encourage them to continue to do so. Own those problems. There's going to be unhistoric, very uncool things that you can't put in your future paperback book about your war story that has to be done. Those are what I call the unhistoric mission-critical tasks that must be accomplished. Don't shy away from them just because they're unhistoric and you can't brag about them. They're mission-critical, get them done. Unfortunately, that's how we got sucked into the contracting realm as well. JSOC was, hey, we're about to fail a huge service contract. But it'll pull you into some weird places, and that's okay. It'll keep you young. Novelty is important for a lot of folks, and it'll keep you youthful. And you'll find yourself less on the wrong side of the generation gaps. So that's really my 4 rules, right? It's not hard to execute. They're easy to keep in mind. And frankly, if you reflect on them, you can continue to draw wisdom out of them, or at least I have for the last 18 years or so. But before I hand the mic back to you, sir, I do want to list one sort of like, I'm going to call it like this transcendent judo master technique that Jay already kind of hinted at, but I'm gonna double click on it and put a finer point on it. I would challenge you not to make a move based on who gets the credit. Never make that your deciding factor of which way you're going to take an action or a task or accomplish something. I'm asking you to give people good advice, no matter whether you like them or not. Let people take your ideas. If they can run with them faster than you, let them have them and cheer them from the sidelines. Help your competitors on a project. I get it. I know how the evaluation system works. I know that we all can't be ACOMs. But you know what? If you just let that go, there's so much you can accomplish. So if you stay focused on the greater good, you can rise above your report card. Now, here's why not everyone's ready for that, and why it's a bit of a transcendent judo master move, is because I will guarantee you are going to get screwed over that. I'm going to ask you to return to your Army values and think about selfless service and what moral courage is. I'm going to challenge you to do it anyway. So with that, if anyone has any questions about what Defense Innovation Unit does, how we can help with contracting actions and all that other business, I owe some folks some points of contact on your drone program because we've got some free tools government created that can help you. I'd love to have any sidebars you guys want to. All right, sir, thanks.
Yeah, let's give them all a quick round of applause. This just validates my thought or my philosophy that really all you gotta do is put smart people in a room together and give them some left and right limits, like talk about innovation that people at the tactical level can understand, and you'll be wowed. And we could not have asked for better comments or more appropriate comments for this audience. And we're at just over an hour, and so we're going to do the right thing. We're going to take a quick pause, but before we do, I just want a couple of the highlights as I was taking notes here from Pete and Lauren. As they were talking about what they do and what their passion is, I heard enable come out several times. It takes me back to the definition of mission command, that exercise of authority and direction by commanders using mission orders to enable discipline initiative. And that just fits right in line with what we try to do inside this brigade, what the Army is trying to do is exercise mission command in order to leverage the talents of everybody in the organization. So as a BCT, we've got 4,300 soldiers plus when we include our artillery battalions. And we have so much that we have to do that the leaders can't do it by themselves. We need all 4,300 Rakkasans moving in the same direction, building readiness and preparing to take the fight to the enemy. And innovation is no different. We can't do it, even with just all the talent in this room, we can't do it. We've got to reach down to our lieutenants, our platoon sergeants, our squad leaders, team leaders, and our vehicle mechanics, the guys that are probably down turning a wrench in the motor pool right now wondering, there's a better way to do this. I wish someone would just ask. Increase the size of the innovation labor pool. So, and from Rob, he talked about culture. I mean, we've talked about culture from day one. It's a culture of problem solving. It's not just solving, but it's also listening and providing that feedback loop to people to know that you are actually listening, and making sure that they understand that they're part of the solution and being willing to underwrite risk. Jay, you spoke their love language. You talked about identifying the pain. I've never heard the Venn diagram of pain. I'm going to make one after this and see where I'm at. But then their eyes lit up when you talked about fueling yourself with hate and caffeine. You're speaking to the right audience here. But whatever it takes to fire you up and keep you looking for solutions and doing stuff in your free time, because you can't solve all these problems from 06 to 1700 every day. This has got to be, you got to be passionate about it. You got to be willing to find other people who think the same way, or even people who don't think the same way but want to solve problems and do it in your free time in order to really make things happen. Tim, your experiences watching innovation inside of bureaucracies is spot on here, and it's something that we are not in Silicon Valley. Okay, we have day jobs, as do people in Silicon Valley, but ours are. We're in a hierarchy in the United States Army, and we have some very specific things that we have to do in order to be ready to answer the nation's call. But we want to do it better. We want to innovate while we're doing this. So we have to create these parallel networks, create a coalition of the willing, and get people working together. And I love the fact your point is sometimes suboptimal is the best solution, because you can't sit around waiting for the optimal solution. You can strive for it, but sometimes if you're improving, it doesn't have to be disruptive. It can be incremental. Then you're improving the fighting position and leaving it better than you found it. Disruption being the outcome, not the goal. Eddie, way to wrap it up there with 4 simple principles. It's something that easily fits in a green notebook and can be retweeted, which we're all just recently have entered into the Twitter sphere. But it's a great way to flatten organizations and share good ideas, which is what we got to do in order to spread this beyond any one company, battalion, or brigade, share it across the division, across the Army. And I saw everyone's eyes light up when you mentioned the OPFOR experiences, because coming off of a summer of a lot of OPFOR support, 3 of our battalion, in fact the whole brigade, I think, either has supported other units, either JRTC, National Guard units up in Michigan, or our sister brigades here in the 101st. Not only are they great opportunities to learn, build readiness, build a team, but a great place to let young leaders go out there and run wild and really demonstrate leadership and initiative. So you guys are spot on. I appreciate the comments, and then I'd ask that everybody, when you take a 10-minute break, think of some good questions, because the rest of this show is about you and your questions and figuring out how we can move forward as an organization. All right, thanks.